the perception of AI, because you just mentioned that from the business side, there's a lot of possibilities and there's a hope that it will lead to growth. But in the meantime, if we're saying, okay, the market's going to change, what our jobs are going to change, that's not necessarily something that fills a lot of people with excitement, right? There's already some uncertainty about the workplace, and now being told you need to learn this whole new thing. It's not going to make people go, yeah, awesome. They're more likely going to go, oh no, am I going to keep my job? I don't know about this stuff.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome, everyone, to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today, July 18th, a few days past my birthday. So July babies unite. We all love our July birthdays. And we're bringing all the news that you can use this week. And I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group. We are a research and advisory firm. And joining me today for the conversation is our co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome back on this very hot, I think I'm up to 99 degrees here in North Carolina day. We got lots of tea going on, more than we can maybe even get through today, but because we got to get our show down to 45 minutes today just because we got meetings going on. You would think things would have slowed down being that it's summer, but not that much, right?
Yeah, show some respect for Stacey's birthday. You need some cold tea for the hot weather, but no, there's a lot going on. What was very interesting about this fortnight is that we saw not only news, of what's going on with the companies, what's going on with people, but it seemed to tie into the broader conversation. There was a lot of, I know this is a terrible corporate word, but synergy between what we were seeing individually where companies were expanding and what they were doing, and part of what you might have just seen in the broader news. So I think we should get started because there's a lot to talk about.
Let's dive in. We should probably just make one note about, for those who are listening to this point, the annual HR System Survey, which is a big part of what Cliff and I do every year, as you know, around this time, is closed. We are in the process of data cleaning. You will be getting some announcements in the next couple of weeks about where all that's at, where you can see access to it, all that information. But every couple of months we've been talking about that. So survey's closed. And Cliff, we are now at, I think we announced this last time, but the numbers are in now, over 10,000 individual responses. So just a big shout out, thank you to everyone who took part in this research this year. I think the market is hot, and I think some of these topics we're going to talk about are part of why, right?
Yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about data and the importance of data, and so we really appreciate having those numbers being so high. We'll also talk about other events we've been at and other things like that. I do want to point out that all of this data is going to come out at HR Tech. We are going to be on Thursday morning, so make sure you stay through if you want to hear that, the big debut of all of those numbers and consolidating all the information you gave to us. We've got some upcoming events. Our good friend and co-founder Susan Richards was at an event with Multiplier, and we're going to do a little more.
That they did. Yes, in New York.
Yeah, they did. Their first one, and we're going to go a little more in depth, but she found it very informative. She suspects you're going to be hearing more about them. They've kind of flown under the radar. They're really building out their tech stack, really trying to help out the middle market. US-based companies really focused on compliance. But like I said, we're going to do a little addendum to this and get more in depth. But I want to talk about some other companies as well. Worx has acquired the French payroll firm Socelia. All our French listeners, please let me know that I pronounced that perfectly. I really appreciated it.
Worked hard on that, guys. You got to know. He went out and got the pronunciation the whole bit. So,
yeah. So what Worx is targeting here is small businesses in France specifically. So really looking at small and medium-sized organizations within the French sector. And so, obviously the continued globalization, Worx has been working hard on that. So that continues. And we had another acquisition with Lightcast acquiring Rhetorik. It has a kind of offbeat spelling. If you wanted to look that up, that's Rhetorik, not the normal spelling of Rhetorik, but that's how these organizations do it. So that'll be expanding some of their offerings, especially when it comes to skills data, which is what Rhetorik has mostly been known for and a large portion of what they do. And that's pretty interesting because we were just talking about this yesterday, weren't we, Stacey?
It is. I think, what's happening in the market is where am I going to get the best skills data that I can base up and benchmark against my own internal skills data set, right? And so a lot of that has to do with taxonomies. A lot of that has to do with where they're being pulled from. Are they scraped from the internet? Are they used from different conversations? If you have a skills database right now, you've got some financial sway. You could actually probably sell some of that in the market. And so organizations are trying to figure out how to make money off the data. And we've talked about that for a while. It's interesting that we're seeing sort of two places where organizations are growing. One is what you see with SD Worx, which is growing globally, more payroll, more people in that area, or growing our data set and figuring out how to sell those, right? Like those two things right now becoming sort of the, can I grow fast enough globally, or can I grow fast enough with the amount of data or the kind of data that I have? And so that's the kind of acquisitions that we're seeing take place right now, right?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because we were talking to organization about using sort of skills data for the next step of decision making, right? Of helping make financial decisions, whether in terms of payroll or bringing people on. So it's one thing to know that you may have a skills gap or a need for certain skills. Another thing to know, okay, what are the skills that we have worth and what are those skills that we need worth? And make decisions based on, do we want to build or buy or, rechange our company based on availability. So it's all building towards this idea of talent intelligence.
Yes, that is the term that we're hearing sort of bantered around on all this. But I think in the long run, it is a real conversation we have to have. Because there is a real risk as we're doing all this that we're commoditizing the idea of skills, commoditizing the workforce at a level where everyone's kind of looking for the same skills. Anything that kind of falls outside of that is not valued as highly. And we talked a little bit about that in a webinar that we just did not too long ago. And I think we're going to see more of that conversation as well. And so I do think this conversation about skills, it's meant to create more light layers and levels and opportunities. But like anything else, when it's overused or over analyzed or over sort of wrought, it can also do a lot of monetization and kind of pushing down the factor of what we're looking for.
Amazing point. Yeah, that's something we've seen even in just the naming of what our jobs are, right? Where we went from personnel and then it was human resources to sort of make us seem more valuable. And then we've seen a switch, right? We see more chief people officers and we see people technology because we worry about the dehumanization, right? There's that constant battle between finding value in our people, but not just becoming value points. Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So, interesting things going on. And speaking of modernizing,
where are you going to go with this transition, Cliff?
Well, speaking of modernizing HR, Workday is trying to, bring sort of, we've been talking a lot about Workday and government stuff, but this is a little different. This is Workday as an organization taking all of the work they do specifically for government and making that its own entity within Workday. So, Stacey, you're definitely the Workday expert. Can you walk us through a little bit of what they're doing here? It seems like they're sort of splitting that work out, right?
It is, yeah. So basically, they're creating a wholly owned subsidiary, Workday Government, dedicated to serving the U.S. government. And again, this was not, it was very much mentioned at the analyst day with Workday that they were targeting government as an industry they were going after. That was a given. And to be honest, a lot of the analysts kind of said, oh, wow, really? We really thought that was going to be where Oracle was going to spend a lot of time, knowing how much Larry had invested in that, and particularly how much Larry had invested in that and their relationship with sort of the current government market. What I think is Larry being,
Larry Ellison.
Oracle, Larry Ellison, sorry, I should know. But what I think is interesting here, and we had noted a few months back that there was this on the books, off the books OPM decision, right? Like to basically acquire Workday, to basically revamp the market internally for the OPM, which is the Office of Personnel Management for the government. And that was sort of announced and then pulled back, partially because it was a non-bid decision. And then, there was a lot of people who sort of pushed back on that being a non-bid decision. And so then they basically they weren't putting out RFPs for it. They were making a single decision point. And then, they rescinded that as far as we know. This may be a reaction to that. I don't know for sure. Or this may have just been in place. We know that Workday has been working on getting a lot of the general guidelines and requirements, the Fed ramps, they call them, right? And there's a lot of Fed ramps that you've got to get to be able to serve the US government. We know there are a lot of big contracts coming up, both in learning, in performance management, in just core HR and payroll in this space. And so timing on this works really well for Workday. And we know there's a lot of homegrown, like there is, literally, I was just looking at some of our data, and there's a lot of homegrown tools inside of the government offices and organizations, right? So there has been a push to try and get into a more standardized out-of-the-box SaaS model that will allow them to modernize more quickly, right? What this does, though, is I think this allows Workday to probably move that entity and the financials around that entity a bit faster towards all the FedRAMP requirements. It probably allows them to separate out the relationship between any work they're doing internationally, which can be a risk for organizations like this, and the work they're doing for the US government. We see this happen a lot with consulting firms. They'll create a subsidiary, right? So they can do the government contracting work and not be have the issues with the fact they've got sort of a global workforce, or even where their chief sort of product people are from. Like there's a lot of requirements that come down to who can touch the assets, where they can be, what their background is, and whether or not they have the ability to get security ratings. Now, some of that has gone a little bit by the wayside in the most recent current legislation model, but not all of it, right? And so this is probably a move to make that easier. One of the things that you are seeing is that Workday is built on a zero trust architecture, which means they're designed to provide robust data security and privacy. That's a really big thing for this model. And this is going to push them to get those Fed ramps. They are actively working toward impact level 4 and 5, which are pretty high levels. And they're looking at how they can put AI into it. So I think this was a big move for Workday. I think everybody has to be aware of it, only just from the fact that it is pulling some resources away from the other product areas, right? So which may or may not be an impact, or it's giving them an opportunity just to move this faster, right?
That's exactly it. And speaking of expansion, Amo, who we've mentioned a couple times on the show, but they are not as well known in the United States. They're certainly extremely well known in India and APAC region, but they are expanding with a direct payroll offering made in-house. So you see Niamo Payroll soon, and I'm sure you'll be seeing more of it. It'll be interesting to see their appearance on our survey. We've kind of seen them on occasion, but I think we'll be seeing them more and more. So built-in analytics, which is pretty nice, with reporting and calendar functions. So again, it's a kind of an all-inclusive suite of services that has only sort of begun to tap into the U.S. market in the last 5 years or so. But, it is a very modern-looking system, one that I've seen before in briefings.
And we probably know of like 3, maybe 4 payrolls that are more internationally based that are really pushing to get into the U.S. market, where previously we kind of see these worlds a little separated, because U.S. payroll is very difficult. It's got a lot of tax implications, a lot of different engines you got to run. Global payroll is very difficult, and those two entities don't always match really well. So it is interesting. I think you should watch this space. I mean, the company that we talked about earlier that Susan joined,
Multiplier.
Yeah, Multiplier is also, I think, moving in that direction. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. And keep an eye on it, because as a buyer, I think there has been a reticence to think about sort of international companies and what does that mean for our data set. I think we're seeing now AI and sort of the ease of sort of the regulations around data and where data can sit with the AI conversation has allowed a lot of this to move more quickly, right? And so we're going to see a lot more markets open up, I think, for a lot of these organizations.
Absolutely. And because we're talking a lot about international companies or smaller businesses might not know, I'd be remiss not to mention that we always do a recap of this on LinkedIn. If you're listening to this and you're like, I didn't quite catch the name of that company or Perhaps it's almost certainly not the case that I mispronounced something, but you can go to our LinkedIn page, and we always do recap, and we'll even link to all of these companies' pages so you can find them quickly. So just a heads up, I do the same on YouTube, but in that one, it doesn't have the linking capabilities, so you may want to check LinkedIn for that. But speaking of companies you probably have heard of, we've got Paychex, and they are partnering with SoFi at Work. SoFi, you may already know. It's one of these cases where they have an individual offering, an app that you can get, basically sort of financial planning for everyone. They also do student loans and repayments, that sort of thing. So Paychex and SoFi at Work partnership is working to sort of bring those two together, right? You've got your paychecks, you've got your direct payments that you're getting from your employer, and you can now combine that with the tools that SoFi offers to help you with your personal finances or any of your personal budgeting that you may do, with all those same things, where you can go directly tie it to your student loans or to any of your long-term household financial planning. So again, considering the households and the types of individuals and businesses that Paychex often works with, this seems like a good match to me, Stacey.
I think so. And we've talked a lot about financial literacy. It's one of the biggest barriers for those of us like me who grew up with parents who didn't understand finance. Like they just keep working and we just get our paycheck and then it all will go well, right? Not understanding things like interest rates or not understanding things like, how you really build financial security, right? It wasn't something that people talked about. It was as too taboo to talk about finance as it was talk about sex in my household, right? Like those are two things you just didn't talk about. And so I think, what we're seeing is this opening of that conversation at a level, and particularly with small businesses, because this is a conversation you and I have all the time. As a small business, employees are making a big decision when they're working with small businesses like us, because they have to, there's healthcare, conversations. There's sometimes you're making decisions to work in a more flexible environment, and you're kind of making decisions that you're willing to go for a lower payroll. You're maybe getting an opportunity to work across bigger things. So you're making some real balanced decisions, but that also means sometimes that you're not thinking you don't have the capacity sometimes internally to kind of have that conversation about what those finances mean. And so I think this is a real positive for both Paychex and for the employees. I'm a big proponent of financial literacy as long, and I put this in very big parentheses, as long as they're not also offering predatory outreach. I don't know anything about what SoFi is doing here with Paychex. I'm assuming that Paychex is aware of that and making that as a very clear perspective. We know there are some places where, they use the financial literacy to get them more loans or to get them more things that could actually be higher interest rates or could cause them problems down the road. So I'm always careful to watch that, but that's the downside that I see to some of this, right?
Yeah, it's basically the digital version of those payday loan places, right? Yeah. So always keep an eye, but that's part of what a good financial planning mindset will do, is allow you to spot these sort of things and allow you to think long-term rather than short-term. But let's hope that that's the case here. So kind of tying in a bunch of stories here where we talked about Workday, we talked about India. Workday is getting even more, deepening their partnership with India with a local data center, expanding their team, and just really making their presence known in India. So this has some larger implications. Stacey, I'm going to turn to you as our Workday expert. If not our India expert, I don't know. We need to learn more probably when we have some India literacy, perhaps a company funded trip. We'll talk about that later. But this is very interesting. So Workday, along with a few other companies, we were talking about Indian companies expanding their U.S. operations, but there are opportunities on both sides of the globe here. So how do you read this, and what do you see going on?
Yeah, so I think it's one thing to be very aware that when we're thinking about growing workforces, the Asia Pacific market in general has the largest opportunity for growth in workforce total numbers, right? And it's a younger workforce as well in general. I think Africa is the only one that's a little bit younger than the total APAC market outside of Japan, obviously, right? And in that environment, what we're seeing is that there is a real need for technology to manage that workflow, particularly as that market is moving more upstream with the work levels that they're doing. We talked a little bit last week in our session about sort of the fact that we're seeing, as the opportunity to do double-digit growth lessons here in the United States, because there's just, we've saturated the market slightly, particularly with enterprise applications and HR. the growth model right now is outside the US. And so organizations have to really think about that with that growth model, with moving some of my workforce and my talent outside the US. What does that look like, right? And this is sort of that kind of same conversation here for Workday, right? Which is the India market is a wide open market. It is replacing a lot of still on-premise applications if they had technology at all, or older platforms. It has heavily been an SAP environment for the market in the India space, right? Like that was SAP had penetrated. There was a lot of on-premise SAP, a lot of on-premise PeopleSoft back in the day, right? So Oracle and SAP have been kind of battling out for basically the India market for quite a while. And partially most of the SaaS technologies like Workday and others early on kind of felt that made sense because the per employee investment was not there. People were not willing to put that per employee investment at the same levels that you would see in the United States and Europe and some other countries, right? That has started to shift. We have started to see the per employee investment go up. My good friend Amal Pawar, who runs Newest Consulting, and I have had this conversation on a lot of levels. He said, yes, it feels like there is not as much money here, but what he's seeing is that market is increasing pretty rapidly. There also, I think, too, is just when you're looking at just sheer growth, it is kind of the numbers game here, which is, right, yes, they may pay a little bit less per employee or be expecting a little bit less of a price point for per employee, but the sheer numbers will make up for that conversation, right? And so you're probably seeing that a little bit is that Workday's trying to do a little bit of that calculation as well. And so I think, we're just going to see more of this across the region. I'm waiting to also see who's going to sort of tackle what is a very complex environment in Africa as well. We know Oracle has heavily gone after the Middle East market. We know Eastern Europe is a whole other conversation that organizations are starting to have. Mainland China is another conversation we see in this space as well. All the various islands in the ocean, sort of those end up being big conversations. I think in general, you're just going to hear more about organizations trying to scale up their international workforce and international data sets to accommodate these things, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. In fact, I remember you mentioned Eastern Europe. We were talking about, now I'm blanking on who it was, but opening a data center in Bucharest in Romania.
So had that last week.
But for those of you that are listening, you'll recall. So normally we also like to talk about people sort of getting promoted or moved. But this week I want to shout out someone that's retiring, John Strauss, retiring from Greenhouse. One of the founders has been their president and is retiring. So first of all, it's been great work. Greenhouse has grown under his stewardship. But also, I think pointing out this retirement is a little more indicative of what we're seeing in the market right now. I think at the beginning of this year, Stacey, we talked so much about all of these people coming in, but we know that there's been a lot of changing of roles and movement around. We're not seeing too much just complete drop-off, but we're seeing a lot of movement now. Sort of, it's like the first 3 months or the first quarter or two were sort of marked by all of this increased growth. And I think it's a possibility that volatility that we kept talking about and the uncertainty in the market and the tariffs are beginning to have an effect, at least in the U.S., if not globally, because we're going to be talking a little more about some layoffs and things going on and some retirements. So I thought that was just a little more fitting to talk about a retirement. But again, not this isn't because of that volatility. This is just someone who's been at the place a long time.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, John's been a long time industry sort of person in the market. I think there is a lot of conversation about founder-led businesses versus non-founder-led businesses. You and I have that conversation all the time as to when the founders start to sort of roll out as companies are scaling and need to scale differently. One of the things I would say, there's two things I think that are happening here. One is that we are seeing, particularly in the tech space, but it's not surprising, that a lot of the founders who came in sort of that 2010 right time frame right now, they're getting to a close enough to retirement range, right, that it makes sense for them to sort of de-stress their lives a little bit, right? And why not take that opportunity? And we know people are sort of semi-retiring earlier than they would have maybe in the past because they've, particularly in the tech space, but in other spaces as well, because there is an understanding of that you, when you are sort of getting out of sort of the big business company model, right? There's a lot of opportunities to do little business company models, be on boards, be on one-on-one consulting, do investments. And a lot of people are sort of shifting to that at a certain point in their careers. And I think, we're going to see a lot of that in the market as well. I think the other side of this, though, and we touched on just a little bit, but you're going to see more of it come out as the data starts to come out from our report, is this. We are hitting a very real state in the market of high performance expectations and lots of revenue growth models with a reduction in or an increase in productivity per employee, which basically means that we are reducing and creating more efficiency, and we're trying to get more money out of it. And so we're kind of doing the squeeze inside of our businesses, right? I just saw someone post like a job posting that basically said, we work 50 hours a week. If you're not interested in doing that, don't apply, right?
Yes.
Like those are the kind of things that are common language right now, because this idea of just, we need to get as much money as quickly as possible. Now, my take on a lot of this is that some of it is there is an economic market where that works right now, because of we're sort of rearranging sort of taxes and stuff, both here in the US and globally. But I also think there is we need to really get a lot of money over this next couple of years to be able to invest in AI to then spur the next growth model, right? And so I think there's a little bit of cut early, cut heavily, invest more because AI is expensive, and then reap the benefits down the road. There's a lot of banking on that. We talked a little bit about that last week. And I think that is a whole different business model. And so I do think we're going to see a lot of people kind of shift out of bigger roles, bringing in people who have that sort of new ability to think a little differently, to focus a little bit more in that area. And then, we're going to see them sort of shift into other more advisory roles. So I don't know what John's plans are. I mean, he's like I said, or many of the other founders, I think they all figure that out as they decide how much they either like or not like being out of the office, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, to be continued.
Yeah.
And speaking of Greenhouse, around the same time, unrelated, they did release a report on basically the state of the job market. And it's pretty interesting. So this is focused on the UK and the Republic of Ireland. So it's pretty dire. It's pretty grim. Only 7% of the survey takers believe that the job market favors them, meaning, they don't feel like it's a seller's market, right now. 72% said the job that they got did not match the offer. The job they applied for didn't match the offer. 80% felt insecure in their current roles with AI.
That was the U.S. market, right?
We're now switching to the U.S. at 80%, and a large part of that was because of AI. They felt insecure because of the rise of AI, whether that meant that AI was going to replace their jobs, or they're going to need to learn new tasks, or whatever the case may be. That was a large feeling of that anxiety. And it's pretty interesting. It's something you and I have talked about offline, Stacey, about the perception of AI, because you just mentioned that from the business side, there's a lot of possibilities, and there's a hope that it will lead to growth. But in the meantime, if we're saying, okay, the market's going to change, what our jobs are going to change, that's not necessarily something that fills a lot of people with excitement, right? There's already some uncertainty about the workplace, and now being told you need to learn this whole new thing, it's not going to make people go, yeah, awesome. They're more likely going to go, oh no, am I going to keep my job? I don't know about this stuff. And so you can see where there's sort of conflicting interests, right? We want to make sure that we as businesses are able to compete and are able to succeed and meet market needs, but at the same time, it's people that drive these companies. That's not just a tagline, that's what's happening. And how do you keep them engaged with this new technology and not feel almost competitive with it?
Well, and I think that the Lovelace report that you're going to talk about in the next,
I was about to say,
which is basically, again, focused on the
talk through that. Yeah.
Focused on the UK is focused on the loss of women in the technology space, particularly in the UK market, and how much it is costing the global market on a financial perspective. One of the things I and this was, I think I saw this because Thomas Otter had sort of reposted
That's
it.
Right.
It was put out by Karen Blake. So we'll have some links to it. But what I really thought was interesting here is that they didn't just say, yes, women are leaving the tech base, right? What they did is they figured out the amount of money that the companies were losing, because they were losing both talent, knowledge, and the inability. We have these open positions that people aren't filling with all these high levels of skills that we want, and that women are a big part of that conversation. And why women were leaving those organizations was very clear. It was because they weren't getting opportunities to move up into leadership roles. They weren't being supported. It wasn't that they were looking for, that they didn't have the tech skills. It was much more that the environment was not something that felt worth their time spending time in, right? 70% who are leaving have pursued additional qualifications, 60% find moving into leadership very difficult, 50% regularly overlooked for high visibility positions, right? Like some pretty big things. 50% regularly earn less than the industry average for their seniority. Like there's a lot of reasons why women make decisions oftentimes to go into their own business or to go into consulting roles where they can be valued at a higher level than they would in some of these individual tech roles. What I think all of this leads to in the conversations just had with Greenhouse and with this data set here is that in 2010, when we did massive layoffs, right? That was probably the last time we had layoffs in sort of like 2015 a little bit, but in 2010, and obviously COVID was its own little conversation. But in 2010, we did massive layoffs. People don't remember oftentimes that talent management came out of that era, right? Like I can remember we were just talking about what was talent management in 2007 when I joined Burson and Associates, right? And that was the middle of all of the layoff models that were happening around the impact here in the United States, but even globally around the financial crisis. And out of that grew this massive drive for talent management because what had happened is we reduced our staff, included a lot of expectations for higher performance on the existing staff, and and the engagement of those existing staff dropped. It bottomed, and companies couldn't figure out why they couldn't get any more performance out of existing staff. So in the short term, it's really easy to say, cut, we're going to add AI, it's going to make things better, we're going to do other things. In the long term, we're going to see engagement issues, and they're already starting to show up in the market. We're going to see organizations, and this is going to be a conversation that I'm having in a webinar that we're going to be doing in August with Worx, is at what point do companies realize that the engagement is what they need to start bringing up to get the kind of outcomes? Because no matter how good your AI is, if your employees aren't engaged in it, it's not going to work. That was I think a really important conversation to have, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also, you mentioned the webinars. We did one recently with UKG, and it was about time management. And you probably saw the same sort of questions in chat that we were getting, and they were asking how many people are going to be lost in time management because of these AI capabilities. Will there be jobs for people? How much do you think HR will be impacted in terms of job loss? Like, not about the technology. It's about, how is this going to affect me? And that's a normal human way to feel, right? And you have to take that into consideration when you're making these moves. As we're moving on, I just want to point out Karen Blake and her team just did such great things. I normally sort of summarize, but I'm going to quote verbatim a little bit here because of some of the language she used. And she wanted to point out that, again, women are leaving, and they're twice as likely to leave as men, and they're earning below the benchmark, right? So sometimes you think, okay, well, women have other responsibilities, right? There could be a work-life balance. No, only 3% said that's why they left. And then I'm going to quote verbatim, it's about broken systems lighting 3.5 billion pounds on fire annually while we complain about talent shortages. Yeah. Really good, strong writing there. Love it.
Yeah. And Brittany says, she says they're losing 100 women from our tech sector a day. Think about that, right? So, okay. Yeah.
Right. No, because it's a perfect segue into something we're seeing in the United States.
Yeah.
This was an article all about looking at the college grads versus non-college grads labor segments, I guess we'll call them. We're going to split them in two. Traditionally, we've had more non-college grads than college grads. There's a lot of jobs that we see sort of more likely to be filled by non-college grads: transportation, production, hospitality, construction, on and on, right? The kind of, I guess, ones you quote unquote expect those jobs to be. But what's happening is, because the two segments are growing at disproportionate rates, we're getting more and more college grads and less non-college grads, right? Those make sense, right? But the job market's going the other way, right? The supply and demand aren't meeting. And the title, America's Labor Force is Splitting in Two, I think is evocative of what we're seeing. It's still the case that there are more non-college grads, but if this trend continues, we're going to see, and we are already starting to see, some big issues for this exact same reason, right? Of how many people are we leaving behind, maybe because we're not looking in the right places, especially as we in the United States are feeling more and more pressure to hire only United States citizens, even though we know that there's a large job market in all those areas Stacey mentioned earlier. So this is becoming a problem, and not sort of on the horizon, but now of these things happening. So pretty wild. And again, the data is a large data set, right? This is the Census Bureau. This isn't some small numbers. It's one of the reasons we always try and look at where the data is coming from when we're reporting on this, because we have a big belief and understanding that we need large numbers to make these sort of assumptions. But some really crazy stats here, Stacey. I don't know if there's anything specifically caught your eye from this.
Yeah. I mean, college graduates right now are climbing at they're sort of roughly 1.1 and 1.5% per year through at least 2025 as a record share. Gen Zs are getting graduate degrees, right? And they are replacing less educated retirees, right? Like, so we know there's just a lot of retirees who didn't get college graduations who are now retiring, right? Non-college adults, though, I think the big conversation here is the value proposition of that college degree, and then what else do we need in our market besides college, which is a traditional conversation. My dad was a tech educator, so he basically did what we called sort of education at manufacturing levels, and he did sort of splits between college level degrees and tech and degrees, and basically those were kind of split together and created a new kind of entity in the market. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And right now, that's not a lot of the conversation. Right now, we're talking about no degree or degree, and we're talking about, do you just get a trade certification, or do you get a college degree? I think there's somewhere in the middle that this market's going to meet, because even as we're looking at the trade positions, right, or even if we're looking at positions that might not have previously required anything higher than a high school education in the United States, those roles, what can be automated will be automated.
Right.
One of the fastest declining roles that we saw from the World Health Organization or from the World Health Forum was in cleaning, right? Like, it was like, and that was and you would think, well, okay, but we're seeing automation in a lot of those areas, right? So what we're going to see is that you're going to see sort of a next level up of sort of, I don't need a full college degree, probably a liberal arts degree that we would traditionally think of, but I need enough education to manage the technology that is now in front of me and being used. And I also need a trade degree because I'm going to do a lot of hands-on myself. We just had this conversation that the whole job market, we're going to have a conversation about forward sending engineer conversations, right? We are going to have more highly specialized and skilled professionals who also understand how to manage the tech. That is a joint conversation, and it will require both certain levels of critical thinking and education that we would have traditionally gotten in college and traditional trades training. And I don't know that we're ready for that at all here in the US. And I don't even think Germany and the UK are kind of ready for that, because they've also done a pretty big split in their market around that. I think this is going to be a space we're just not ready for, right?
Yeah, I think that's the case. And you mentioned automation. Of course, we also have talked about AI, right? What are the jobs that will be most heavily impacted by AI? Some of these things like construction may not be, but some of these, what we call entry-level white-collar jobs like data entry very much will be, right? So there may be a sort of flattening of the job market in certain cases, right, as we're seeing an increase in supply. So there's all those factors. And speaking of AI, there's this conversation going on. I think this is part of our tech education series, speaking of your father, that you might have heard. You remember about 4 months ago or something, we started talking about agentic AI.
Yeah.
So now I know everyone has to learn all these terms. It's like a new language. We're now going to be talking about RAG. I don't know if the markets decide to call this RAG or not, but this is retrieval augmented generation. So this is when your AI system is kind of going out and it learns from all of the things that are out there on the internet, right? And then you ask it a question. Now, we're seeing problems, but this is where a lot of hallucinations come from, because it's pulling from possibly an incorrect data set or an outdated data set. So this augmentation means that it's real time. Now it would search through the Googles and everywhere else, right? It would do its own search to sort of augment that retrieval of information, hence the RAG. So you're going to start seeing a lot more companies coming out with this term, using this term. It's important to understand, where it has value and where it doesn't. But I just thought it's an interesting little thing that we're seeing. And, again, kind of giving you the hot tea, giving you the most up to date. It's something we're now seeing almost as a marketing term sometimes, Stacey.
It is. And the link we're going to reference you to is the article written by John Reed, who's a good friend of ours who writes for Diginomica. And if you get a chance to see his interviews and podcasts and some of his writing, it's really valuable because he dives deep on a lot of these conversations. What I want everyone to understand, I think, and why I want to sort of wrap up on this conversation, Cliff, on the RAG issue, is that we've talked a little bit about this we've talked quite a bit, and I ask every organization, this is more of the traditional AI is where it comes from, right? It is the idea that it goes out and it gets a specific answer and it knows what that answer is. And there's a little bit of automation of AI sort of as flexibility in it, but it's mostly focused on getting the right answer and you give it details about where that answer is. Where large language models, the challenge we have with large language models is that they are given so much autonomy if you're using a true LLM to give you an answer that is not strictly defined by what guardrails you've put around it. So there is a lot of, this is where hallucinations come from. This is where it might say something that's not quite right. It is the combination of LLM and RAG that is creating sort of this next generation of what you would call sort of powerful AI conversations. And how that is connected is the most important thing for you to understand when you're talking to your organizations where you might be buying the technologies, or if you are someone who's working on an AI conversation, because whether LLM is on top or below and is pulling or driving those conversations will depend on how much possible hallucination or possible incorrect data or possible information you might get. And so we just had a demo with one of the vendors that we'll talk a little bit about next week when we get some approval to, where they showed us this very structured model of a chatbot that used probably the most, I think, interesting approach to kind of embedding RAG inside of an LLM conversation, right? And I think that's going to be the conversation we're heading to. So more to come on this. I think it's worth it. We'll put the link in the follow-up. Cliff, we got to get going because I know I'm late for a meeting. We got to talk about events. What events do we have coming up? Can you just quickly them for everyone?
Yeah, I'm going to run through these really quick. We can also go to our website under news and views. You'll find links and more information about these if you're interested. We've got the ADP Innovation Day, September 3rd. Stacey, you'll be at that in New York City. Of course, we'll all be at HR Tech, as we've mentioned. And again, stay through Thursday if you want to catch Stacey's session. It's in the morning, and you fly out right after that with your head full of good ideas. Dayforce Discover, October 7th and 8th in Vegas. That will be Stacey and I, or both. Oracle Cloud World, October 12th, 13th in Vegas. I'll be there. Love Vegas. For those of you not watching video, I totally rolled my eyes. November will be UKG's Aspire. I think we'll both be there. In November, we'll have some regional events for iSolve that you'll be at, both in Philadelphia and Scottsdale. Stay tuned for the exact dates on that. Also in November, we'll have the CFO Council. I think that's new, and that's super interesting.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. That's November 13th and 14th. We have a couple of really exciting sort of HR specific sessions and roundtables on that. If you're interested in getting more details on that, let us know. So there are other events I know that we have, but we haven't got them all on the calendar yet. So we'll get more of those over time, Cliff. But because we're at the end of our hour and we got to get going on this, I did want to say that that's it, that we want to thank everyone for joining us as usual. As we wrap today, one other final thing, just if you are looking for the data on the annual HR Systems Survey, we're going to start to send out some notes on how you might be able to buy this year, get last year, or get next year's kind of thing. So watch for those. Those will be coming out, but the whole paper will be available October 31st. But we will have some segments available at the HR Tech Conference. So if you're interested in payroll, HRMS, we're going to have some access to those reports by that time as well. Also, be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. And if you like this and that podcast and have any commentary, we would really love your reviews. We just realized we don't have as many reviews on our commentary. If you like this, please put reviews. It really helps us get sort of the rankings up so people see this. But we are excited about the work we're doing with our new Work to Find platform. And I know they're trying to help with that as well. To stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn and Instagram. You get to see some updated pictures and stuff on there. Thanks, Cliff, for all the work you do on this production. I know it's so much work. As Cliff has mentioned, please visit this on LinkedIn. You'll get more detail there and some good conversation. Thank you to our production team, Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by the amazing founder, Callie Kelly, and our marketing, Summer Orlano, Cole Harris, and the whole staff who helps us get this up and running. Thanks to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. And that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks, hopefully not as hot as we are today, because it's been really hot outside, but with some fun hot tea for you with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights. Bye, everyone.
Bye.